Hi, welcome to my page. Click here to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
That's right, it's time for another edition of Dollars and Cents. So Tom, what are you learning today?
What I'm learning is when you want to find out some good information about your finances and your health and the future, this is a great place to come. Now here's a guy we've talked before. This is Roy Rickster, your disability rep. Good to see you again.
Likewise,
Good to see
Tom.
you. All right, we've talked about little bits and pieces, but I think you're going to get a little broader on this. Applying for disability benefits, and one of the things that you've talked about before is about work history. Going to get a little more deeply into that right now.
Yeah, that's correct. And when we talk about work history, there's two things that are a major concern when we have this discussion. One is your current work effort.
Of course.
Right, and how Social Security may treat any current earnings that you have. The second thing is how Social Security will look back at your past work record.
All right.
That's important because they use your past work record to decide if you have any skills that may allow you to transfer over to some sort of other job, make that transition easier.
Okay, there we go. What are they going to look for?
Right, so traditionally when we think about work, we're talking about competitive full-time work. That's traditionally the standard that Social Security uses.
Sure.
But there are exceptions. There are things that aren't necessarily competitive full-time employment that comes up in some people's work records. So these are things that Social Security are going to kind of look for.
All right, we'll just start and work our way down then.
So situations sometimes can be that a person receives a lot of pay but does very little work. And a good example of this would be if you were an actor who did an advertisement, for example.
Okay.
It might pay really well, but you might only worked on it for
Residuals
3 or 4 hours.
Right.
The opposite can hold true too, in that you can do a lot of work but not necessarily receive very much pay. If you think about a car salesman, for example,
Sure.
he may come in and work 40, 50 hours a week, but if he only sells one car, he may not receive very much in the way of earnings.
Exactly.
So when Social Security is looking at our income, they're looking at substantial and gainful activity. So in theory, it needs to be work that is substantial in the hours we dedicate to it
Okay.
and gainful in the money that we receive from it. So if it doesn't meet those two things, they look at it a little differently.
Okay, now, leftover benefit pay. Explain that one.
Yeah, so I always tell people when we talk about earnings, Social Security is looking at earnings from the sweat of your brow, from work that you've done that's directly tied to the pay that you've received.
Okay.
And so if you have leftover benefit pay, vacation balances, sick pay, things that may be paid out after you leave employment, those are things that you've acquired. You've certainly worked for them, but they're not directly tied to your work effort in real time. And so those
Okay.
things don't count necessarily as earnings.
Yeah, and then commissions, residual incomes.
That's correct. One of the things they do at the Resource Center is they sell auto and homeowners insurance, and so those folks receive commission payments.
Right.
And sometimes those commissions continue years after a person separates from that employment. Again, it's not directly tied to the sweat of the brow. You didn't punch a clock necessarily in real time to get that. So Social Security has special rules for those things.
What I'm seeing so far is that they don't just look to see if you've had a job. This is getting to some depth, is what it is.
That's correct, because there are other situations, such as like what we're going to talk about here, where maybe you work somewhere for 30 years,
Yeah.
your boss likes you, you have a stroke, your capacity diminishes, but gosh, they like you, you've been dependable, you may be the face of the organization.
Right.
They may be willing to make accommodations for you, special situations to make it possible for you to continue to work.
Okay.
And so maybe we have exceptions to work duties. They may roll extra help over. We may be exempt from some things that other employees in that same job classification have to do.
Okay, but I mean, you're looking at the allowing exceptions, offering extra breaks, reduced duties, that sort of thing.
Sure.
How does that affect that decision? I mean, that just happens to be part of what you did.
Yeah, so I had a client years ago who worked at the hospital in Joplin, and she had a condition where she had tumors on her lungs. They would pop, her lungs would deflate.
Okay.
The hospital made lots of accommodation. People donated vacation time to her, et cetera. So when Social Security was considering her earnings to determine whether or not she made too much money essentially for Social Security, they reduced her earnings compared to the percentage of the job she actually did, and they counted less earnings.
Okay, it makes sense.
Another thing that comes off our earnings are impairment-related work expenses. So say, for example, you've got a physical disability, you have to take a cab to work because you can't drive. You can deduct the cab fee off of your earnings and reduce your earnings. Special service animals, aids that may help if you have to rent like larger monitors to be able to see, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
All of those come off. And so overall, we're looking at things that are suggested to be work, but really maybe they're not. And a couple other examples here are seasonal, part-time, and really short duration jobs.
So this is why you talk to a person like Roy. You want to put that up? There you go. There's your QR code. Of course, 417-812-6698. You get to talk to him when
Yes.
you call here.
Right, and so if you have some sort of unusual thing in your work history, or if you're currently working and you're getting some help from your employer, give me a call. There may be ways to work around that and still help you get qualified for disability benefits.
That's another way they can help at the Resource Center. Back to you guys.
Thank you, Tom.